Hey everyone, how's it going? Will Daniel here again. Today we're going to be talking about backing up your files and some tips on how to do it a little bit better and safer. I hope that I don't have to explain why you should back up your drives, but there are ways to make sure that your workflow is as effective as possible and as safe as possible so that you're backing up your footage properly instead of just copying and pasting without thinking about it too much. Now, before I start with a few tips, I just want to mention that there are plugins out there like Red Giant's Shooter Offload plugin that can do quite a lot when it comes to safely backing up your files. But if you can't afford paid plugins, then you can just follow along with these tips and that should definitely come in handy. Tip number 1 is to check the total size of your offload and compare it to your original footage or the original folder that you are copying to make sure that the size is exactly the same to the byte. Is because if there are any documents or any little files that you missed copying, you would immediately be able to tell that by just looking at the total size. Also, if any of the files are corrupted, usually the size would differ from the uncorrupted files. And so if you look at the total size and see that both of them are exactly the same, chances are that you don't have a lot of problems on your hand, if any. Tip number 2 is to always back up from the source material that you have. So for example, if I have one source, a hard drive or an SD card that has all the footage, if I'm copying that to 2 different drives, I would copy it once from the SD card to drive 1, and then again from the SD card to drive 2, instead of copying it from drive 1 to drive 2. The reason is, if in the first time I copied from the SD card to drive 1, if there was an error that occurred or some kind of glitch that happened that made some of the footage corrupt, I wouldn't be copying the corrupt footage over to drive 2. I would be copying it from the original source again, which gives me more of a chance that that error won't occur again. So it's always better to back up from your original source rather than copying the copies that you've made from the source. Tip number 3 is to always back up your project files as you're editing through them. So every time I sit down for an edit session, whether it's an hour or 4 hours, after I finish all the work or even halfway through my work, I would copy the project files into the backup drives so that I'm backing up the project files as I go instead of just backing up the original footage. Because sure, if I lose my project files, I still have my footage, but I've lost the project files. And so if you copy those as well regularly to the drives, whatever you lose, you can always bring back. And last but not least, tip number 4 is to give one of your backups or one of your hard drives to another crew member so that you're not the only one who's responsible for keeping all the backups. That way, if something literally happens to your room or your house or everything burns down, you still have a backup that's outside of where you are and where you're working. So if it's possible, keep a backup away from you and preferably have someone else take care of it while you have your own backup. All right, that's it for today. I hope those backup practices were helpful to at least some of you. I hope this video was entertaining in some way. Although talking about backing up your footage isn't really the most fun topic, but it's definitely one of the necessary ones, because if you don't do it, bad things might happen to your project and you might lose a client or two just because you didn't back up your footage properly or back it up at all. If you have any suggestions that I failed to mention, please put them in the comments below, as always, wherever you're watching this video, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.